think about it. Just think about it. You'll get it. You feel that? Oh, shit. Oh,
Read a stunning article by Catherine Scholes in The New Yorker this week. And frankly, if I lived right now in the Pacific Northwest, I'd be considering moving. Seriously. The gist of it is this. The federal government estimates 13,000 Americans will die in a major earthquake and tsunami in the Pacific Northwest. It's not a question of whether, but when. This earthquake is coming, and it's overdue. Consider that the magnitude 9.0 earthquake in Japan just a few years ago, remember that, killed more than 15,000 people in the north of Japan and injured thousands of others. Seismologists say that the quake that will strike on our Pacific Northwest coastline should be even stronger, at up to a 9.2. They call such a quake a margin rupture quake, and it's every bit as bad as it sounds. Here's the reason for it. Our entire continent sits on the North American tectonic shelf, right? Plate, I should say. Off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, from the top of Washington State all the way down to Northern California. This is it. And another plate called the Juan de Fuca is trying to slide up under North America, but it's stuck. We have an illustration over here in the big wall. Let me show you what this is. This is our continent here. This is the Cascada Mountains. This is the Cascadia, what do they call it? The Cascadia what? Bridge. The Cascadia Bridge. I was actually asking him, but thank you. The North American plate here and the Juan de Fuca plate here. This one's sliding up under, and eventually this is going to go down, send a huge wall of water up. That wall will go all the way over to Japan, and the other will come onto our shore within 15 minutes. And when it slips, it will unleash not only a colossal earthquake, but also that tsunami, 700 miles long, and in some places up to a 100-foot high wall of water and whatever it's pushing, like houses and dump trucks and schools. Thousands and thousands will not escape. The New Yorker quotes a FEMA official who says, and I quote, "Our operating assumption is that everything west of Interstate 5 will be toast." Everything west of Interstate 5 is gone. That's Seattle, Tacoma, Portland and Olympia, Salem and Eugene, wiped out. Altogether about 7 million people. That's not including tourists. So think of summertime. The New Yorker reports that FEMA calculations indicate the disaster will damage or destroy about 1 million buildings, including 3,000 schools and 1/3 of all fire stations. And perhaps the worst part of all of this, these sorts of earthquakes happen at regular intervals in exactly this part of the world, have forever. On average, according to seismologists, about every 240 years. So when was the last one of these massive 9.2 or so earthquakes? Well, the last one was more than 300 years ago, the year 1700. It struck in the Pacific Northwest and sent a 600-foot wave of water all the way to Japan. So right now, on average, the Pacific Northwest is decades overdue for the really, really big one. Michio Kaku is a physicist and professor at City College of New York. This article is stunning. Is it overstated in any way?
No, the Cascadia Fault is an earthquake waiting to happen. We know it's going to happen with an energy 30 times the maximum energy of the San Andreas Fault. So Hollywood has us brainwashed into thinking the big one is going to be in California. No, the Cascadia Fault would pack energy 30 times the energy that the San Andreas Fault can muster.
The article speaks of a liquefaction of the earth, that part of the earth will turn to liquid.
That's right. We're talking about major energy surges inside the ground that'll cause it to liquefy. We've seen that in Japan. We saw that at Fukushima, and it's almost like quicksand. One day you're walking on solid ground, the next you're falling right into a quicksand.
This earthquake would last 4 minutes or more, the rattling and the shaking, and then within 15 minutes they estimate this wall of water. In the entire inundation zone, you could have water up to 100 feet high.
That's right. And in the inundation zone, we have 70,000 people that have almost no clue as to what could happen. You know, in Japan, you have to live with earthquakes every day. Children go through tests and drills. People are conscious of this. But in the Pacific Northwest, it barely rates on the radar screen.
There's something that happens before the shaking that we can sense, sensors can pick up. That's an early warning system that they have all over Japan, especially in the north and in the Tokyo area. They've been trying to get it pushed through, look for money for it in the Seattle-Tacoma area, nothing.
That's right. Before the earthquake actually hits, there's a compression wave that is detected by animals, for example. Animals start to act very strange, and we've seen that happen before earthquakes. And then a minute, 2 minutes later, boom, you head for the hills because there's nothing left to do except to go to high ground.
You mentioned what this sort of event has caused in history.
That's right. In the year 1700, there was a massive earthquake and tsunami which surged over Japan. And then running the videotape backwards, you can actually see that in 1700, it originated with a Cascadia fault. And then we physicists can calculate the energy, the magnitude, the dynamics once we got these two events linked together. And that was only done in the last decade or so.
And you mentioned Mount Everest.
That's right. Mount Everest is also created by the collision of two faults, just like what we have here. The one fault going under, the other fault going over, and that created the Himalayan mountains. That created Mount Everest. That's the power packed by the subduction zone earthquake.
Okay. Averages of when things are going to happen are really not very reliable. I think they use by example, the difference between 4 and 6 is 2. I forget exactly how they did it. We can't be sure exactly when this is going to happen, but we're positive it's going to happen. If you lived in the Pacific Northwest, you had little kids, would you live there?
I'd think twice. I would have to drill them just like what they do in Japan, be part of their life in terms of having an emergency kit, where to go in case of an emergency, what to do, what frequencies to go to, and so on and so forth. And by the way, we know that this is going to happen because by simply drilling into the seafloor, we can see evidence of ancient tsunamis going back 10,000 years. And we've known that. There have been
how many over that period?
41, which means that the time between the cycles is about 240 years.
Wow.
And it's been 315 years since the last big one. Now, of course, this is not rigorous, it's not absolute. But according to this figure, we could be overdue for another big one.
Yeah, by many decades. It's nice to talk to you. Thank you. Really weird and scary.
That's right. And, you know, within the lifetime of some of our viewers, they may see Seattle and Portland destroyed.
It's a great article at the New Yorker. It's in this month's edition and spectacularly well written. And the facts that go along with it they're really sort of mind-numbing. See you soon. Thank you.
It's predicted to be worse than Hurricane Katrina, worse than the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. Scientists and FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, are warning of a pending doom for the Pacific Northwest. An earthquake along a little-known fault line that would kill thousands and affect millions. The Cascadia subduction zone stretches about 700 miles from Cape Mendocino, California, to Vancouver, Canada. Big cities expected to be affected include Seattle and Portland. Some scientists believe the earthquake, when it goes off, will reach between 8.7 and 9.2 on the Richter scale and cause a tsunami. So will this new revelation become a reality? Is it only a matter of time? I was joined earlier by John Vidale, a seismologist at the University of Washington. I first asked him why we're just now hearing about this little-known fault line in the Northwest that appears to be so much worse than the San Andreas, the commonly known fault line in California.
Well, we hear the most about the San Andreas because it has about 3/4 of the risk that we estimate for the West Coast. We've known about the Cascadia subduction zone for quite a while. It's a serious risk. A big earthquake in the Pacific Northwest could be the worst disaster the country has faced historically. But it only has a small chance each year, about 1 in 300 chance. We're hearing about it this week because some reports have somewhat overestimated the impact of the event. The event would be very serious, $100 billion of damage is one estimate, and kill perhaps thousands of people. But the reports we're hearing this week are wiping out the entire coast in large parts of the city of Seattle and Portland, killing tens of thousands of people. And these are bigger than the estimates most people think. So in a sense, this week we're worrying about some kind of overestimates of what the impact of this earthquake might be.
So FEMA is holding an event next summer called CASCADIA Rising to practice preparation for an incident along this fault line. So I want to pull up some of the estimations that you were just referring to. We got these directly from FEMA today. Estimations they're using to plan for a natural disaster in the Pacific Northwest. They project a disaster along this fault line could result in 13,000 people dying, 27,000 people being injured, 1 million people being displaced and needing shelter, and an additional 2.5 million people needing food and water. So these numbers, they really are staggering, but you're saying they're not quite realistic.
Yeah, they're partly for the exercise to make sure we take care of all the things we need to watch out for. So it's a bit of a worst case. You know, the numbers that are kind of objective and for the use of planning for preparing are more in the order of 1,000 people killed, 2,000 people killed, and $100 billion of damage, but not leveling the cities of Portland and Seattle. And some of the reports have even more exaggerated the impact than the FEMA scenario that's for the exercise next year. That's right.
Well, it's good to prepare. If something like this were to happen, what are the areas that would be affected?
Well, the fault does run all the way from Northern California up into Canada, so it would affect a wide zone, and it would affect, you know, the cities of Seattle and Portland seriously, but it would only affect, you know, a few of the buildings, the older buildings, perhaps some of the bigger buildings, some of the bridges. It by no means would affect every structure in the city, and mostly people would notice that in all likelihood, you know, the power might go out, it might be hard to communicate, it might be hard to get around, but it would not reduce the streets to rubble like one saw in that San Andreas movie a few weeks ago, for example.
So they're talking about a tsunami being a possibility. When we think tsunami, we think of what happened in Japan, Fukushima. That was a terrible tragedy. Is a tsunami likely, and how far inland would it affect people in the Northwest?
Yeah, in a magnitude 9 earthquake, a tsunami is inevitable. And the height of the tsunami is anywhere between 5 meters and 20 meters. The tsunami in Japan was the biggest we've ever seen, about 30 meters, but that only hits in rare cases, and it was quite a surprise when it did in Japan. But yeah, the entire coastline is vulnerable to tsunami, but the tsunami would not reach into Seattle and Portland. Those cities are not on the ocean.
Okay, great. Well, that was John Vidal, a seismologist at the University of Washington. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.
The most popular article on the New Yorker's website is rattling many Americans. The really big one examines a titanic earthquake and tsunami, but not where you might imagine.
A fault line called the Cascadia subduction zone runs for 700 miles off the Pacific Northwest coast. Experts think it will trigger the worst national disaster in North American history, and it is overdue. CBS News science and futures contributor Michio Kakuka is a physics professor at the City University of New York. Good morning.
Morning.
So it's overdue. When will it might come?
Well, this is the mother of all earthquake faults. It can pack a wallop 30 times that of the San Andreas fault. So forget all the Hollywood hype about the San Andreas fault. We're talking about an earthquake, a 9.0, similar to what devastated northern Japan, which killed over 15,000 people and caused $250 billion in property damage.
Understanding all that, when is it likely to happen?
We think that in the next 50 years, there's a 1 in 3 chance that it will erupt. In other words, we are overdue in some sense. The last big one was 315 years ago. We think the cycle time is roughly 240 years. Do the math. We are overdue in this calculation with another big one.
Now that you've sufficiently scared the poop out of people in Seattle and Oregon, what do you want people to do with this information? And I feel like we keep hearing this all the time. The big one's coming, it's coming, it's coming. What do we do?
Well, first of all, we don't know exactly when it's going to happen,
Right.
So don't panic. The thing to do is, first of all, be rational and get an emergency kit, a first aid kit with ample food, water, and perhaps a transistor radio.
How is a first aid going to a kit going to help you when you're washed away by a tsunami?
Because not everyone will be washed away. It means that there will be lots of survivors, and the survivors do have to have access to fresh water, to food, and also a transistor radio in case the internet is out. And also talk to your children about where the high ground is. Talk to your kids about what to do, how to reassemble, because after Fukushima, we had thousands of people that were just left homeless without provisions.
So
now remember,
Professor
in
Kaku,
Japan, they practice this. Here in this country, we don't.
So Professor Kaku, this wave could come in at 500 miles per hour. So the people of the Seattle will have a 10-minute warning. There are 70,000 people that live in this inundation zone that could be affected. How do 70,000 people evacuate in 10 minutes?
You can't. However, you can take the first steps to save as many thousands of people as you can. And again, in Japan, they practice this. Children know exactly what to do, and there's an early warning system that we don't have in Seattle that we do have in Japan. There are building codes that are not being enforced. Realize that many buildings are just going to be toppled when this gigantic earthquake at 9.0 and the tsunami hits the Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland area.
I mean, I just thought this was stunning. The guy who's in charge of FEMA for that whole area said that their operating assumption is that everything west of Interstate 5 will be toast. That's really scary.
That's right. Remember, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. According to the laws of physics, it will happen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In the
We still don't
lifetime of
really
many of
know
our
the
viewers.
when yet. We still don't really know the when. But you're just saying, start thinking about it.
That's right. Be prepared now.
Got it.
The tsunami has engulfed several cities in Miyagi Prefecture.
What happened in Japan is a good analogy of what has happened here in the past and can happen again.
Debris piles in the background.
This is an example of, unfortunately, what Oregon has to look forward to. This is not a fantastical theory of the future. This is going to happen soon. You can imagine a big conveyor belt of the Juan de Fuca plate is under here, and where they're locked together, you're deforming the whole North American plate, and this is
The current research puts the odds of having a 8 or 9, a Cascadia event, at about 37% chance in the next 50 years. Call that 1 in 3. These things not only happen here, they happen here regularly.
The risk here is extreme. This is about the worst soil in Portland we could have built on. 90-some% of our fuel comes right through this area.
Achilles heel infrastructure, without question. We expect to have a lot of bridge and road failure. People may not be able to communicate with each other. I worry most because I think people will not understand when there's no shelter, there's no food, there's no water. We've just been behind the ball for so many years, so we're playing catch up. We're not as prepared as San Francisco, Los Angeles. I don't sleep well at night.
An ancient tsunami that inundated this valley 1,000 years ago flooded all the way up to this point. The tsunami picked up sand from the beach and nearby dune. It's a record of that tsunami. No one could outrun it.
When the earthquake happens, the big magnitude 9, and the wave shows up in about 20 minutes, you've got thousands of people all along this waterfront here that would have to realize that they're at risk and would have to start moving.
I guess if I were to have to give Oregon a grade in our preparedness, if this were to happen tomorrow, I think we would probably be below sea.
We're doing a post-earthquake drill. We get dispatched to go out to do a rapid evaluation of all the bridge structures within the city. Collapsed.
There's about a 7-inch gap on the north approach, and we're going to close this bridge.
I worry that I'll be kind of stuck where I am for a little while, and I think that's going to be true for many people who live on one side of the river but either work or have to take kids to school on the other side of the river.
The early part was about the geology and about the maps. And now people understand that and they're asking the question, I'm not a geologist, I'm just a regular person. What do I have to know for my life?
People need to understand that they will be on their own for more than just 3 days, in some cases up to 2 weeks, if not longer.
Yes, there's a danger, there is a bit of fear, but that fear can be transmuted into preparedness.
This ride is intended to simulate a supply run for their local neighborhood. Ooh, no sharp turns.
Do you have a cargo bike? What does your neighbor need?
When a disaster comes and you can step up to the plate and help out, that's going to be where the rubber really meets the road.
This is my go bag. I have pure water, I have a warm body. That's 3 days. Don't let this overwhelm your life and overly cloud your life, but to have it be something that we know about, something that we've internalized, part of our being, like rain. We know to wear rain jackets even though the sun might be coming out.
This is not that difficult. It's education, awareness, and the will to do something about it.
Just think about it. Just think about it. You'll get